Isla Vista. Sometimes people ask me whether this is true or not true, and I'm not going to tell you. So, I killed this guy one time. It was weird. I was driving back up to school at UCSB late on a Saturday night. Right after you get outside of Oxnard, the freeway turns into Pacific Coast Highway. So I was driving along, and I can still remember the song on the radio. It was called 7 and 7 Is by Love. And I felt this big thump on my car. It wasn't really a big thump or anything like that. It was just like a normal thump. Then my front windshield cracked. I pulled over to the side of the highway, and I got out of my car. There in the middle of the road, I saw what looked like a pile of gray rags. My first thought was that I'd hit a dog or something. Then, before I had a chance to do anything, several other cars ran over the thing. I saw pieces of stuff fly away from the object. It was only then that it struck me that I'd hit someone. And things get a bit hazy after that. I remember a cop car pulling up, then an ambulance. It all went really fast. So the cop got my name, my registration and stuff, and then he said they'd be contacting me, and that was it, really. I got in my car and drove back to Isla Vista, where I was sharing an apartment with another friend of mine from high school. When I got there, there were a couple of other people in my apartment. I told them I'd hit some guy on PCH, and I was pretty sure that the guy was dead. For a minute or so, nobody said anything. Then we all started laughing. Not because it was funny or anything, but just because it was so weird. Then I started crying. That was the only time I ever cried about what had happened. In fact, that was the only time I ever really felt anything at all about it. I was in therapy at the time. My therapist was this really nice German lady named Mrs. Gottstanker. I told her what had happened and all. I asked her how come I didn't have any emotions about it. At the time, I remember I was having a problem having emotions about lots of stuff. I figured when something like this happened, you ought to have some kind of feelings about it. Mrs. Gottstanker was very supportive of me. She explained that since I knew nothing about the person I'd hit, that he effectively had no identity, and so it was perfectly normal that I hadn't had a lot of emotions about it. But I just killed a guy, I explained. Shouldn't I be feeling something? First of all, she said, you are feeling something. The very fact that you're concerned that you don't feel anything means that you actually are feeling something. But I don't feel like I felt anything, I retorted. Well, it's quite possible, Mrs. Gottstanker explained, that you're probably in a state of shock. And if that's the case, you'll probably experience a delayed reaction at some point in the future. So she wrote out a prescription for Librium and told me that my time was up. After that, I tried to find out something about the guy that I'd hit, so at least I'd know who he was. After contacting the Ventura Police Department, I finally got some information. His name was William Travers Holman. He was 35 years old. The officer I spoke with described him as a transient. Apparently, he'd been drunk, and he was trying to run across PCH when I'd hit him. The officer I was speaking with told me that the accident was clearly Travers' fault and not mine. Even before they told me that it wasn't my fault, I'd already thought of other ways to get out of it, like maybe I'd just hit him, but actually he wasn't really dead. No, it was the other cars that had run over him after he was laying there that killed him, not me. But in my heart, I knew that was bullshit. I knew that I'd dealt the death blow. And even if the guy was a transient at all, he hadn't always been one. He was something else once. He had a mom and a dad. He'd once been in love with someone. I mean, people aren't just born bums. Something makes them that way. It really bugged me that the police would just write him off like that. Anyway, whoever heard of a bum with a pretty name like William Travers Holman? Nobody. That's who. So I thought of all kinds of stuff about the guy for a while, and then finally I guess I just sort of forgot about the whole thing. The only two real bad things about the whole incident were that the next day I was washing my car off, and I saw that there were pieces of what looked like part of the guy's skull stuck in the grill of my car. I remember washing them into the gutter real quick. The other thing that still sticks in my mind was this really weird thing that happened after I'd pulled away from the accident. I was driving along just sort of numb. Finally I came to a stoplight in Summerland, which is right outside of Santa Barbara. So this car pulls up next to me at the stoplight, and then I saw that this guy was in the car was trying to signal me. I didn't really want to acknowledge the guy, but he seemed really frantic about getting my attention, so finally I reached over and rolled down my passenger window. I can still see the guy. I remember thinking that he looked exactly like Robert Mitchum. Not just any Robert Mitchum, though. I specifically remember at the moment that he looked like the Robert Mitchum in the movie The Night of the Hunter. In fact, I half expected the guy to have the words love and hate tattooed on his knuckles, just like old Mitchum did in the movie. Anyhow, after I rolled down my window, this guy rolls down his window. "Do you want to go to confession?" he said. "What?" I blanched. The guy looked at me and he kind of half smiled. But it wasn't a very nice smile. "Well, I saw what happened back there, and I want to know if you would like to ask God's forgiveness," the man said. "See, I'm a priest, and I thought I might be of help." I just sat there looking at the guy. The next second, this huge bubble of anger welled up in my gut. For a second there, I imagined pulling this guy out of his car and beating the fuck out of his fucking face into the pavement until it was nothing but a bloody pulp. "No, thank you," I said. "I don't believe I'd care to do that." Then I rolled up my window and drove off. But then, the really weird part happened. The guy started following me. He followed me almost the entire way back to campus. I remember thinking all these crazy thoughts like maybe he was some kind of maniac or something. I thought all kinds of weird stuff. Then I thought maybe that I'd gone into shock and I was just hallucinating the whole thing. Finally, when I got to Goleta, the guy pulled off the freeway. I watched his lights in my rearview mirror as they disappeared into the fog rolling in from the ocean. I remember that my hands were shaking really bad. They didn't stop shaking until I finally got back to my apartment. Like I said, the whole thing is pretty hazy. Sometimes I think I might actually have just invented it. You know how sometimes if you tell yourself something so many times, sometimes you don't know if you made it up or if it really happened. Anyhow, I never forgot about that guy. In fact, I still think about him even to this day. Sometimes when I'm driving, I feel like some crazy preacher that looks like Robert Mitchum in The Night of the Hunter is following me. I wish I wouldn't think that kind of stuff, but I just can't seem to help myself.